When the assault was intended to the city, written by John Milton. John Milton was born in London on December 9 in 1608. He was born into a middle class family and was the son of a composer and musician. He was home tutored till the age of 12 or 13. He mastered over Greek, Latin, and the Hebrews. He was determined to be a priest, but gave up the idea. He was a staunch Puritan, had an unsuccessful marriage, and married thrice. The great influences on John Milton were of the Bible, his Puritan upbringing, the Roman, Italian, and the Greek poets, the traditional epic poetry, and the play Lucifer by Just van den Wandel. He was a great poet, author, civil servant for Commonwealth of England. He wrote the treatise defending the execution of Charles I. He lost eyesight while serving as Secretary of State for Foreign Tongues. In 1660, monarchy was restored and he had to suffer hard times. He was imprisoned and stripped of his property. He died in 1674 and was buried next to his father in Giles Church in London. The Miltonic Sonnet. The Miltonic sonnet keeps the Petrarchan length and rhyming scheme, but does away with the stanza break between the octave and the sestet. Otherwise, the Miltonic sonnet is a normal sonnet. A sonnet is a poem of 14 lines. Milton kept the distinction between the octave and the sestet in terms of function, but merged them into one 14-line stanza. When the assault was intended to the city. Milton's eighth sonnet, originally untitled but subsequently more commonly known as When the Assault Was Intended to the City, was written by the poet in 1642 as a form of a joke, a serious joke as it has been described. Milton imagines himself at his home in London at a period when it might have been attacked by King Charles I. The poem's fancy is that it should be written out on a piece of paper, which is then pinned outside of the door and act as a means of an appeal to spare the life of the poet who cowers inside. Now let us begin with the poem. The octave, the first 8 lines. Captain or colonel or knight in arms, whose chance on these defenceless doors may seize, if ever deed of honor did thee please, guard them, and him within protect from harms. He can require thee, for he knows the charms that call fame on such gentle acts as these. And he can spread thy name over lands and seas, whatever climb the sun's bright circle warms. The poem was written by Milton during 1642. At that time, it was believed that an attack on London by Charles I, and his army was imminent. In the above lines, Milton, fearing that his city will be defenseless during assault, calls for the heroes, the captain or colonel or knight in arms. It refers to the army men. He calls for heroes to protect his city and its inhabitants, and he, as their reward, will immortalize their name all over the world through his poetry. Required here means to make a reward or to make an appropriate return. So he will return the gallantries in the form of his poetry. The sestate. Lift not thy spear against the muses' bower. The great Emathian conqueror did spare the house of Pindarus when temple and tower went to the ground, and the repeated air of sad Electra's poet had the power to save the Athenian walls from ruin bare. In line 10, the great Emathian conqueror refers to Alexander the Great. So, when Alexander the Great took Thebes and entirely razed the rest of the city, he ordered the house of Pindar to be preserved out of regard to his memory. And the ruins of Pindar's house were to be seen at Thebes in Pausanias' time, who lived under Antonius the philosopher. So we see that Alexander the Great also spared the poet Pindar. In line 12, it refers to a passage in Plutarch's Life of Lysander. When that general had taken Athens, he proposed to change the government. Some say he moved in council that the Athenians might be reduced to slavery, when at the same time Erianthus the Theban proposed wholly to destroy the city and leave the country desolate. But a little afterwards, at an entertainment of the captains, one of them repeated some verses out of Euripides' Electra. So, this way, Electra saved the Athenian walls from ruin. The poem, When the Assault Was Intended to the City, is an outstanding example of Milton's grand poetry style, which made him famous. It was his eighth poem to be published, and he was yet maturing his style. But even then, it shows the massive talent of the prodigy, which was seen at the best in Milton's epic Paradise Lost. The rhyme scheme that follows in the octave is A B B A B B A. In the sestate, it is C D C D C D.